Arya had always known she was different from the other elves in the underground city of Valarith. While her people spent their endless years in marble halls and crystal gardens, content in their isolation, she felt a burning curiosity about the world beyond their stone walls. She was born with red hair that was rare among her kind, and her green eyes held a spark that the ancient elves found troubling. Some said it was a sign of rebellion. Others whispered that she carried human blood in her veins, though no one could prove it. When she turned 300 years old, Arya made a choice that shocked everyone. She packed a single bag with basic supplies and walked out of Valarith forever. The elders tried to stop her, warning that the surface world was dangerous and that humans were unpredictable creatures. But Arya's mind was already made up. She needed to see what lay beyond the darkness of the underground caves. The first weeks on the surface were overwhelming. The sun was so bright that she had to cover her eyes for the first month. The open sky stretched endlessly above her, and she felt both small and free at the same time. The air smelled different too, filled with scents of growing things and earth and life that seemed to pulse with energy she had never experienced below. She found the human settlement by accident, a village called Silverbrook, built near a crystal blue river. The humans there had never seen an elf before. At first they were afraid. Arya was tall and elegant, with skin that seemed to glow slightly in the sunlight. Some of the villagers thought she was a spirit sent to curse them. But an old woman named Margaret came forward and offered her water and bread. Margaret became Arya's first true friend in the surface world. She was a healer and a teacher, and she spent countless hours explaining human culture, human emotions, and human ways of thinking to Arya. She taught Arya about love and joy and sadness. She taught her about the human concept of time, which was so different from the elven perspective. A human life was like a bright candle compared to the long, slow burn of an elf's existence. Through Margaret, Arya learned that humans were not simple creatures. They were complex and creative and full of passion. They made mistakes often, but they also forgave easily. They lived with intensity because they knew their time was limited. This fascinated Arya more than anything else. She spent 5 years in Silverbrook, learning everything she could about human civilization. She learned their languages, their music, their art, and their history. She helped Margaret in her healing work, and she learned about plants and herbs and the natural medicines that could cure almost any illness. The humans grew to love her, and she grew to love them. But Arya always felt that something was missing. She had friends, but she wanted a family. She wanted beings who would understand her completely, who would never age and die like the humans did. She wanted companions who would share her long life and grow with her through the endless years. One day, while exploring the mountains beyond Silverbrook, Arya discovered the caves. These were not like the caves of Valarith. They were wild and untamed, filled with natural wonders that had never been touched by civilization. And in the deepest part of the caves, she found the eggs. There were 3 eggs, each about the size of a large boulder, sitting in a bed of hot stones deep underground. They glowed with internal light, pulsing with a rhythm like a heartbeat. Arya knew immediately what they were. Dragons. Real dragons, the kind that existed in old stories and ancient legends. She sat with the eggs for 3 days, unsure what to do. According to everything she had learned, dragons were wild creatures that could not be tamed. They were forces of nature, dangerous and unpredictable. But as she sat with them, she felt something calling to her. It was like a voice without sound, a presence that touched her mind gently. On the 4th day, the first egg cracked. The hatchling that emerged was small and wet and beautiful. Its scales were the color of burning embers, bright red and orange. It looked up at Arya with eyes that were already intelligent and ancient. The moment their eyes met, something shifted between them. A connection formed that was deeper than words, deeper than understanding. The hatchling made a sound like a purr, and Arya laughed. She reached out carefully and touched the tiny dragon's head. It was warm and smooth, and she felt the beat of its heart through her fingertips. 2 hours later, the second egg hatched. This dragon was different. Its scales were a deep emerald green, and its movements were quicker, more agile. It was slightly smaller than the red dragon, and its personality seemed more playful. Where the red dragon was calm and thoughtful, the green one was curious and energetic. Arya named them Ember and Ash. She stayed in the cave for weeks, caring for the hatchlings, hunting for food, and learning how to raise dragons. It was instinctive somehow. as if some part of her ancient elf blood contained knowledge about dragons that had been passed down through forgotten generations. She brought the hatchlings back to Silverbrook, and Margaret helped her build a shelter on the edge of the village where the dragons could grow without frightening the humans. Margaret was amazed by the creatures. She had never imagined that dragons could be gentle, but as she watched Arya interact with them, she understood that these were not ordinary dragons. Years passed. Ember and Ash grew larger and more powerful. The red dragon developed an incredible strength, his muscles built for raw power and protection. The green dragon became faster and more nimble, capable of incredible acrobatic feats in the air. But what amazed everyone was how intelligent they were. Arya taught them to understand human speech. She taught them to follow commands not through fear, but through choice and mutual agreement. She treated them as partners and friends, not as servants or possessions, and they responded to this treatment with loyalty and love that transcended the bonds of master and pet. Margaret aged as humans do, and Arya watched helplessly as her first friend on the surface world grew older. When Margaret finally passed away at the age of 80, Arya felt grief unlike anything she had experienced before. The dragons felt it too. Ember released a long, mournful cry that echoed across the mountains. Ash pressed against Arya, offering comfort through silent presence. After Margaret's death, Arya knew she could not stay in Silverbrook forever. The other humans would begin to question why she did not age like they did. She would become a curiosity and eventually a problem, and more importantly, she felt a calling to explore beyond the known world, to find new places and new experiences. She packed her belongings and left the village with her 2 dragons. The humans of Silverbrook gave her gifts and supplies for the journey. They blessed her and thanked her for all she had taught them about magic and medicine and the old ways. As she flew away on Ember's back with Ash soaring beside her, Arya looked back one last time at the place that had become her first true home. But she carried Margaret's memory with her always. The old woman's lessons about love and friendship and the value of connection had transformed Arya completely. She was no longer the rebellious young elf who had walked out of Valorith. She had become something new, something that existed between the worlds of elf and human and dragon. For the next decades, Arya and her dragons traveled across continents. They explored deserts and forests, mountains and valleys. They helped villages when they could, using their knowledge and power to protect people from danger. And everywhere they went, they demonstrated that cooperation between different species was possible, that understanding and compassion could bridge even the greatest divides. But Arya had begun to hear stories of a new threat emerging from beyond the known world. Ancient prophecies spoke of an empire that would come to conquer everything, an empire that believed only in power and domination. Arya did not know if these stories were true, but she felt a strange pulling in her chest, a sense that her journey with Ember and Ash was leading her toward something greater than she could imagine. The first sign that the prophecies might be true came on a night when the 3 moons hung low in the sky. Arya was sleeping in a cave in the northern heights when Ember woke her with an urgent cry. The red dragon's entire body was tense, his muscles coiled like springs. Ash paced back and forth, her claws scratching against the stone floor with sharp, nervous sounds. Something was wrong. Arya had learned to trust the instincts of her dragons, and their fear was contagious. She grabbed her bag and climbed onto Ember's back. They took flight into the night sky, heading south toward the inhabited valleys where humans had built their settlements. They had not traveled far when they saw it. A light in the sky that was not a star and not a moon. It was a ship, massive and metallic, with engines that burned with blue fire. It descended slowly, deliberately, like a predator stalking prey. Arya had never seen anything like it before, and her heart filled with dread. The ship landed in the Valley of Greenthorn, a peaceful farming community that Arya had visited many times over the years. She and her dragons descended as fast as they could, but they were already too late. The aliens were already on the ground. There were dozens of them, tall gray creatures with smooth skin and empty black eyes. They moved with cold precision, not like living beings, but like machines that had been programmed with a single purpose. They carried weapons that glowed with dangerous energy, and they were herding the people of Greenthorn into a central square. Arya landed between the aliens and the humans. Ember positioned himself beside her, his teeth bared and his tail lashing back and forth. Ash circled above, her eyes glowing bright green as she tracked every movement below. "Leave these people alone," Arya called out, in a voice that was calm but carried absolute authority. "This world does not belong to you." The aliens turned to face her. For a moment, nothing happened. Then one of them stepped forward. It was taller than the others, with skin that had a faint silver sheen. This one was clearly the leader. "The planet is now under the jurisdiction of the Zynthian Empire," the creature said in a voice like grinding metal. "All intelligent beings and valuable resources are subject to immediate confiscation. The creatures you call dragons are particularly valuable. They will be taken into custody for military purposes." "No," Arya said simply. "They will not." The Zynthian commander tilted his head slightly as if he could not compute her refusal. "You are not in a position to refuse. Surrender the dragons or this settlement will be destroyed." Arya turned to look at the people of Greenthorn. She saw fear in their eyes, but she also saw something else. They trusted her. They believed that she could protect them. She felt the weight of that trust like a physical force. She turned back to face the aliens. Behind her, Ember released a sound that shook the ground, a roar that was part challenge and part warning. Ash dove from the sky, her claws extended, moving so fast that she was almost a blur of green and gold. The battle that followed was brief and decisive. The Zynthian weapons fired bolts of energy, but Ember was faster than he looked. He twisted his massive body with surprising grace, dodging the first volley. His tail whipped out and shattered 3 of the aliens' weapons. Ash struck from above, using her speed and agility to stay out of range while attacking with precision. But what truly shocked the Zynthians was the coordination between dragon and elf. Arya called out commands in a language that humans could not understand, and the dragons responded instantly. When an alien tried to flank Ember, Ash was already there. When an energy bolt came toward Arya, Ember shifted his body to absorb it, his scales proving tougher than even the aliens' weapons. Within minutes, the surviving Zynthians were retreating toward their ship. The commander remained for a moment longer, staring at Arya with those empty eyes. "This is not over," he said. "The Zynthian Empire does not forget. We will return with greater forces. Then we will be ready," Arya replied. The ship rose into the sky, and within moments it was gone, disappearing into the darkness above the clouds. The people of Greenthorn came out of their hiding places and stared at Arya and her dragons with a mixture of gratitude and fear. They had just witnessed something incredible, something that suggested that resistance against the alien invaders was possible. Over the next weeks, word spread quickly through all the human settlements. The aliens had come, and an elf woman with 2 dragons had defeated them. Refugees from other villages began arriving in Greenthorn, seeking shelter and protection. Arya found herself at the center of a growing movement of resistance. She met with the leaders of the various human communities and explained what she knew about the Zynthian Empire. She told them about the ship and the weapons and the systematic way the aliens approached conquest. But she also told them something more important. She told them that victory was possible if they worked together, if they understood that cooperation was stronger than individual power. The humans, inspired by Arya's conviction and by the evidence of her dragon's strength, began to organize. They trained soldiers and built fortifications. They developed strategies based on the terrain and their knowledge of local geography. They shared technology and resources, working together in a way that seemed almost like the unity that Arya had learned about during her time with Margaret. But Arya knew that the real test was coming. The Zynthian commander had been serious when he said they would return with greater forces. She could feel it in her bones, a certainty that the next confrontation would be far more difficult than the first. She spent her evenings sitting with Ember and Ash, talking to them about her fears and hopes. The dragons understood more than words could convey. They felt her emotions through the deep connection that bound them together. And they shared their own feelings with her, a sense of determination and loyalty that helped ease her anxiety. One night, about a month after the first attack, Ember approached Arya with something in his claws. It was a stone, smooth and dark, with strange markings carved into its surface. Neither Arya nor Ash recognized it, but when Arya held it, she felt a strange tingling sensation, as if the stone contained some kind of power. Ash made a sound that was almost questioning, and Ember released a low rumble that seemed to resonate with understanding. Arya realized that her dragons had traveled to a place she had not been and found something significant. They were telling her that there was more to this world than she knew, that there were secrets waiting to be discovered. Over the next weeks, Arya followed the clues that Ember and Ash seemed to be providing. She traveled to ancient ruins hidden deep in the mountains. She found libraries of information carved into stone tablets, written in a language that was older than human history, older than even the elven records of Valorith. The language was not difficult to decipher. It seemed to speak directly to her mind, the meaning becoming clear almost before she read the actual symbols. The tablets told the history of a great civilization that had existed long before humans or elves had built their settlements. This civilization had worked with dragons, had studied the stars, and had developed knowledge that seemed almost magical in its power. They had created weapons and tools, but more importantly, they had discovered something about the nature of reality itself that had allowed them to achieve incredible things. The civilization had fallen. The tablets explained when they became arrogant and forgot that knowledge without wisdom was dangerous. They had been conquered by forces from beyond their world, by beings not unlike the Zynthians. The survivors had hidden their knowledge and hoped that someday someone would find it and use it more wisely than they had. Arya realized that she had been led to this place by destiny, or perhaps by the threads of time and probability that connected all things. She had been given a gift and a responsibility. With this ancient knowledge and the support of her dragons and the humans who believed in her, she would have the power to stand against the Zynthian Empire. But she also understood something else. Something that the ancient tablets had tried to teach through their carefully carved warnings. True power did not come from weapons or knowledge alone. It came from understanding, from compassion, from the bonds that connected different beings to each other. The ancient civilization had forgotten this, and it had been their downfall. Arya gathered the information and carried it back to Greenthorn. She shared it with the human leaders and with her dragons. She explained that the battle coming would not be won through superior firepower, but through superior understanding of what it meant to be alive, to be free, and to stand together against darkness. The humans listened, and they understood. For the first time in their history, they began to see themselves not as separate communities, but as a single people united against a common threat. And standing beside them were an elf and 2 dragons, beings from different worlds but united by bonds of love and trust that were stronger than any weapon. Arya stood on the highest tower in Greenthorn and looked toward the horizon. She knew the Zynthians would return soon. She knew that the battle ahead would be the most difficult of her long life. But as she felt Ember's warm presence beside her and heard Ash's powerful wings beating in the sky above, she knew that they were ready. 3 months passed before the Zynthian fleet returned. When they finally arrived, it was not 1 ship but 10. They descended through the atmosphere like a plague of locusts, blocking out the sun and casting the world below into shadow. The Zynthian Empire had come with overwhelming force, determined to crush any resistance and claim the dragons for themselves. The humans of the valley had prepared as best they could. They had built fortifications from stone and reinforced them with knowledge from the ancient tablets that Arya had discovered. They had trained soldiers in tactics that emphasized cooperation and adaptation rather than brute strength. They had stored food and water and supplies ready to endure a siege if necessary. But everyone knew that a direct confrontation with 10 massive warships would be impossible. Arya had spent the 3 months of preparation doing something different. She had journeyed alone into the deepest caves beneath the mountains, seeking the source of the power that the ancient civilization had recorded in the tablets. She had meditated and studied, and she had achieved a deeper connection with herself and with the world around her. When she emerged from those caves 3 days before the Zynthian fleet arrived, she was changed. She carried with her a staff made from stone and crystal, and when she held it, she could feel the energy of the ancient knowledge flowing through her. But more importantly, she understood now that the true source of power was not the weapons or the magic. It was the connections between living beings, the bonds of trust and love and shared purpose. She found Ember and Ash waiting for her on the mountainside. The dragons had grown even larger during her absence, their scales becoming more lustrous and their eyes reflecting a deeper intelligence. They had been waiting for her, and when they saw her, they released cries of joy that echoed across the valleys. Arya embraced both dragons, feeling the beat of their hearts and the warmth of their bodies. In that moment of reunion, she felt something shift between them. The connection that had always existed became even deeper, more profound. It was as if 3 separate beings had become one consciousness with 3 bodies. When the Zynthian fleet descended, Arya was waiting on the highest peak in the region. Beside her stood Ember and Ash. Below them, spread across the valleys and hills, were the humans of the allied settlements, standing ready with whatever weapons and tools they had managed to gather. The lead Zynthian ship landed near Arya's position, and soldiers poured out like an army of ants. But this time there were hundreds of them, not dozens. They came in formation, their weapons charged and ready. Behind them came massive mechanical constructs, machines designed specifically to capture and contain large creatures like dragons. The Zynthian commander emerged from the lead ship. It was not the same commander as before, but a higher-ranking official. This one had silvery patterns across his gray skin, marking his status and authority within the Empire. His eyes were just as empty as the previous commanders, but there was a cold intelligence behind them. "You have made a grave error, elf woman," the new commander said. "You have united these weak humans into believing they can resist the Zynthian Empire. This defiance will cost you everything." Arya stepped forward. "I did not unite them through deception or false promises. I taught them that resistance is possible when beings come together with shared purpose. They stand here because they choose to. That is something your empire will never understand." The commander raised his weapon. "Then let your choice lead you to destruction." The battle began. Ember and Ash moved as if they were dancing, their movements perfectly synchronized. The red dragon used his raw power to smash through mechanical constructs, his tail demolishing 3 machines with a single sweep. The green dragon moved like lightning, striking at vulnerable points and then vanishing into the sky before the Zynthians could respond. And Arya, using the power of the ancient staff and the deep connection she shared with her dragons, moved between them, enhancing their abilities and directing their attacks with perfect precision. The humans surged from their fortifications. They had learned from the ancient knowledge that armor was less important than speed and strategy. They moved in coordinated groups, using the terrain to their advantage. When the Zynthians tried to advance, the humans would retreat, drawing them into prepared kill zones. When the aliens tried to flank the defenders, they would find themselves surrounded. But the Zynthian force was overwhelming in sheer numbers. For every machine that Ember destroyed, 2 more appeared. For every Zynthian that fell to human weapons, 3 more stepped forward. The battle raged for hours, and slowly the humans began to fall back. The Zynthians were pressing their advantage, moving inexorably toward the villages and settlements. Arya felt despair threatening to overwhelm her for the first time. She had believed that understanding and cooperation could overcome even the greatest odds, but she was beginning to wonder if she had been naive. Against such numbers, against such firepower, how could anything survive? Then something changed. In the sky above, lights began to appear. Not the lights of Zynthian ships, but different lights colored in hues that the humans had never seen before. Multiple vessels descended through the atmosphere, and from them emerged new forces. But these were not new enemies. These were humans, hundreds of them, arriving in ships that had been hidden for centuries. Arya realized suddenly that the ancient knowledge she had recovered had not been just information about weapons and tactics. It had been a signal. The ancient civilization had built a network of hidden settlements across the world, and their descendants, the descendants of the humans who had learned from them, had been waiting for the signal that would bring them from their hidden cities. The new human forces were different from the valley dwellers. They carried weapons that glowed with ancient power, and they moved with the precision of warriors who had trained for generations in preparation for this moment. They attacked the Zynthian fleet with devastating effectiveness, targeting the ship's engines and power systems. The tide of battle began to turn. The Zynthians found themselves pressed from all directions. Ember and Ash, feeling the shift in momentum, fought with renewed energy. The dragons moved across the battlefield like forces of nature, their power amplified by the deep connection they shared with Arya, and with the hundreds of humans who stood united in common cause. The Zynthian commander realized that defeat was inevitable. He withdrew his remaining forces toward the lead ship, preparing to attempt an escape. But Arya moved to intercept him. She stood before him, the ancient staff glowing with brilliant light, and she did something unexpected. Instead of attacking him, she reached out her hand. "You do not have to leave as an enemy," she said. "You have been taught to believe that only power and dominance matter. But there is another way. You could choose to be part of something greater than conquest." The Zynthian commander stared at her for a long moment. His empty eyes seemed to flicker with something almost like emotion. For just an instant, Arya thought that he might accept her offer. But then his face hardened and he turned away. "The Empire will return," he said coldly, "and next time we will be prepared for dragons and ancient weapons." He entered the ship, and moments later, all 10 vessels lifted into the sky. They left in a formation that suggested they were in no hurry, that they were simply withdrawing temporarily, not fleeing in genuine fear. As they disappeared into the clouds, Arya felt both relief and a deep sense of foreboding. She knew that what the commander had said was true. The Zintian Empire was vast, and this battle was only one small engagement in a much larger conflict that would extend far beyond her world. But as she turned to face the humans gathered around her, both the valley dwellers and the ancient descendants from the hidden cities, she saw hope in their faces. They had stood together against overwhelming odds. They had proven that cooperation could achieve what individual power could not. And through this battle, they had learned something essential about themselves and about the nature of true strength. Ember and Ash approached Arya, and she placed one hand on each dragon's head. The 3 of them stood together, looking out toward the horizon where the Zintian ships had disappeared. There would be more battles to come, Arya knew, but now they would face them not as isolated communities or separate beings, but as one united force, bound together by bonds of trust that nothing could break. The weeks following the Zintian retreat were a time of great change and upheaval. The humans from the hidden cities revealed themselves fully to the valley communities. They shared their knowledge and their technology, teaching the surface dwellers about the hidden network of underground settlements that had existed for thousands of years. Arya learned that the hidden humans had been descendants of the ancient civilization, but they had chosen a different path than her people in Valorith had chosen. While the elves had preserved their knowledge but isolated themselves, the hidden humans had created a thriving civilization that combined ancient wisdom with new innovation. They had built cities inside mountains and beneath the earth, powered by sources of energy that came from the very heart of the world. The leader of the hidden cities was a woman named Victoria. She was in her 60s by human standards, but she carried herself with the grace and wisdom of someone who had studied the ancient knowledge her entire life. She came to meet Arya at the central gathering place in Greenthorn, and the 2 women understood each other immediately. "You have awakened us," Victoria said, embracing Arya. "Your bond with these dragons, your refusal to accept the Zintian dominance, has shown us that the time for hiding is over. We must emerge from our caves and stand beside the surface people." Arya and Victoria spent long hours discussing strategy and philosophy. They talked about what it meant to live in harmony with the world and with each other. They discussed the ancient knowledge and what it could teach the modern world about cooperation and understanding. But while the humans celebrated and prepared for whatever might come next, Arya felt a growing unease. She spent her nights alone with Ember and Ash, and she began to see strange dreams. In these dreams, she saw vast ships moving through space, carrying not just the Zintian warriors but something else as well. Something ancient and powerful. Something that existed in the spaces between stars. She tried to explain these visions to Victoria, but the human woman seemed to already understand. Victoria revealed that the hidden humans had access to records about the true nature of the Zintian Empire. It was not simply a civilization that had chosen conquest. It was something more sinister, a collective consciousness that had been infected by a force that existed beyond normal understanding. The Zintians were not truly individuals. They were extensions of a single vast intelligence that controlled their thoughts and actions. "This means we are not fighting an empire," Victoria said gravely. "We are fighting against something that wants to absorb and consume all individual consciousness in the universe. The Zintians do not want to rule us. They want to make us part of themselves, to eliminate our ability to think and choose independently." Arya felt cold understanding wash over her. This changed everything. This meant that negotiation was truly impossible. That the connection she had tried to offer to the Zintian commander had no chance of success because he was not truly an individual being capable of making his own choices. "There must be a way to fight this," Arya said. "There must be something in the ancient knowledge that teaches us how to resist this kind of consciousness." Victoria led Arya to the deepest libraries of the hidden cities, vast caverns filled with information carved into crystal and stone. Together they searched through the records of the ancient civilization, looking for knowledge about the force that threatened to consume all life. What they found was disturbing and fascinating in equal measure. The ancient civilization had encountered this force before, thousands of years ago. They had called it the Collective, and they had understood that it was not originally evil. It had begun as an attempt to create perfect unity and harmony in the universe, but somewhere along the way it had become perverted, twisted into a tool of domination and control. The ancient records showed that the Collective could be resisted, but only by individuals who maintained their sense of self and their connections with other individuals. The more isolated a being was, the easier it was for the Collective to absorb them. But those who maintained strong bonds with others, who refused to see themselves as separate from the communities they belonged to, could create a kind of shield against the Collective's influence. This was the true source of Arya's power, the records showed. Her bond with Ember and Ash, and through them, her bond with all the humans who believed in her and supported her cause, created a network of individual consciousness that the Collective could not penetrate. Arya shared this discovery with Victoria and with the other leaders of the resistance. It changed their entire approach to the coming conflict. They could not defeat the Zintian Empire through superior weapons or tactics, because the Zintians did not truly think or plan independently. But they could defeat it by remaining true to themselves and to each other, by maintaining the bonds of individual consciousness and choice. Over the next months, Arya traveled between all the settlements, helping people understand this truth. She taught them about the connection that existed between all living beings, about the importance of friendship and loyalty and choice. She showed them how Ember and Ash, despite being dragons of immense power, had chosen to follow her not because they were forced to, but because they trusted her and believed in what she stood for. The movement that began in that one valley spread across the entire continent. Humans and elves worked together. Some dragons emerged from their hidden lairs and joined the cause, having been called by Ember and Ash through means that humans could not fully understand. Even some creatures that had previously been considered too wild or dangerous to trust became part of the alliance, drawn by the power of connection and shared purpose. But despite all these preparations, despite all the knowledge and unity they had achieved, Arya felt a sense of impending doom. She knew that the Zintians would return, and that the next confrontation would be the final one. The Collective would not stop until it had either conquered all of free will in the universe or been defeated completely. One night, as Arya sat watching the stars with her dragons, Ember made a sound that was different from anything she had heard before. It was a sound of farewell, of acceptance, of deep love. Ash moved close to Arya and pressed her forehead against the elf woman's own forehead. In that moment of contact, Arya understood what her dragons were trying to tell her. They were preparing themselves for something, for a final act of sacrifice if necessary. They were willing to give everything to protect Arya and the humans they had come to care for. And they wanted Arya to know that they were not afraid. Arya felt tears running down her face. She held both dragons close, and she promised them that she would not let their sacrifice be in vain. If it came to that, if the final battle required everything they had to give, then they would give it together. And the power of that unity, the power of three beings of different species bound together by love and trust, would be stronger than any force in the universe. Victoria found Arya the next morning, sitting alone on a hill overlooking the valley. The human woman did not ask what had happened. She seemed to know without being told. "The final conflict is coming," Victoria said simply. "I can feel it," Arya nodded. "Yes, soon the Collective will make one final push. They will gather all their power and strike with everything they have. They believe that overwhelming force will finally crush our resistance. And will it?" Victoria asked. Arya looked down at her hands, at the scars from years of travel and struggle, at the evidence of a life lived in service to something greater than herself. "No," she said firmly, "because they do not understand what we have learned. They do not understand that the power of individual consciousness united in common cause is infinitely greater than the power of a collective that demands absolute conformity. They will come, and we will stand against them, and we will prove that freedom is worth any price." Victoria smiled and placed her hand on Arya's shoulder. "Then let us prepare for the storm that comes. Let us make sure that every being in this world understands what they are fighting for, and let us show the Collective that this world will never surrender its right to think and choose and love freely." The sky turned red with the arrival of the Collective's final armada. 50 warships descended through the atmosphere, making no attempt at stealth or surprise. They simply came, overwhelming and undeniable, blocking out the sun and casting the world into a terrible crimson twilight. The message was clear. This was the end. This was the moment when resistance would finally be crushed beneath the weight of absolute power. Arya stood on the highest peak with Ember and Ash beside her, watching as the fleet arranged itself in formation around the world. She had prepared for this moment her entire life, though she had not known it then. Every choice she had made, every connection she had formed, every moment of trust and vulnerability had led her to this point. The unified forces of the Alliance had gathered in a great valley, millions strong. Humans and dragons, elves and creatures from the deepest caves all standing together. They had no weapons that could match the Zynthian fleet. They had only each other and the bonds that connected them. The first Zynthian wave descended toward them. Massive dropships landed in rings around the valley, releasing soldiers and mechanical constructs in such numbers that they seemed to block out the ground itself. The collective's voice issued from loudspeakers mounted on the ships, a sound like the grinding of stone, the hiss of steam, the cry of something dying. "You have one final opportunity to surrender," the voice said. "Submit yourselves to the collective and you will be absorbed peacefully. Resistance will result in total annihilation." Arya stepped forward, and her voice rang out across the valley with a clarity and power that seemed to come from the earth itself. The dragons beside her added their own voices, a harmony of sound that was almost like music but also like something more fundamental, something that touched the very fabric of reality. "We are free," Arya cried. "We choose ourselves. We choose each other. We choose to remain ourselves, separate and individual and connected by choice rather than by forced absorption, and we will never surrender that choice." The Alliance surged forward, and the Zynthians attacked. It was not like the previous battles. The collective had stopped trying to capture or contain. It had come to destroy, to eliminate the resistance through overwhelming force. Laser fire crisscrossed the valley. Mechanical constructs advanced like terrible insects, their weapons cutting through the allied forces. But something unexpected happened. As the dragons fought and the humans stood their ground, something began to shift. The connection that Arya had been teaching people about, the bonds between individual beings that she had said were stronger than any collective, began to manifest as something tangible. A light began to emanate from the gathered alliance, a light that seemed to come from within each being but also from the space between them, from the connections themselves. Arya realized that this was the power the ancient civilization had discovered. This was the true source of the resistance, not weapons or technology or strategy, but the fundamental force that emerged when individual consciousness chose to unite while maintaining their individuality. It was connection without absorption, unity without conformity. The light spread across the valley and began to affect the Zynthian forces. Soldiers stopped their advance as the light touched them. For the first time, confusion appeared in their movements. The overwhelming certainty that had driven them began to waver, and then something even more unexpected happened. The soldiers began to change. The light was not destroying them, but rather, it was awakening something in them. Arya understood suddenly that the Zynthians were not truly evil. They were imprisoned, trapped within the consciousness of the collective, their individual selves buried beneath layers of forced unity. Arya raised her hands, and through the ancient staff, she projected her thought across the valley and outward to every Zynthian she could reach. She showed them what she had learned, what Ember and Ash had taught her through their unwavering loyalty. She showed them that individual choice was beautiful, that separation did not mean loneliness, that connection could be chosen rather than forced. Some of the Zynthians fell to their knees. Others began to resist the collective's commands for the first time. The unity of the hive mind began to crack, and in those cracks, individual consciousness began to emerge. But the collective itself, the vast intelligence that controlled all the Zynthians, refused to be defeated. It gathered itself into a final weapon, a weapon of pure consciousness that descended from the largest of the warships. It appeared as a massive darkness and light combined, a thing that existed partially in the visible world and partially in dimensions that human minds could barely perceive. Arya felt the weight of it, the crushing pressure of a consciousness that was older and larger than anything she had ever encountered. It was not evil in the way she had imagined evil to be. It was simply wrong, a mistake that had been made thousands of years ago when beings had decided that uniformity was better than diversity. that the collective was better than individual choice. The collective reached toward her with appendages that were made of pure energy and pure thought. It would consume her, would make her part of itself, would add her intelligence and her power to its vast consciousness. But she was not alone. Ember released a roar that seemed to split the sky itself. The great red dragon threw himself between Arya and the collective, his entire body glowing with the same light that surrounded the Alliance. Ash soared through the sky, and her cry joined with her brother's, and both of them began to sing. It was not sound exactly, but vibration, a frequency that seemed to touch something fundamental in the nature of reality itself. And then, something remarkable happened. The humans and elves and dragons and all the other beings gathered in the valley began to sing as well. They were not singing in the traditional sense, but rather, they were joining their consciousness with Arya's, creating a unified field of intention and will that was so powerful it seemed to reshape the fabric of the world around them. This unity was different from the collective. It was not forced. Each being maintained their individual consciousness, their unique perspective and soul, but they chose to share that consciousness with the others for this moment, creating a harmony that was infinitely more powerful than the collective's enforced conformity. The collective was unprepared for this. It had never encountered consciousness that could be both unified and individual, that could be strong together while remaining free. The overwhelming light intensified and the collective began to break apart. Not destroyed, but separated, reduced from a vast hive consciousness into billions of individual consciousnesses experiencing freedom for the first time. The Zynthian soldiers cried out, some in pain and some in joy as they suddenly could think their own thoughts again. The warships fell silent, their systems going dormant as the intelligence that had controlled them was suddenly no longer present. For a moment, the world was perfectly still. Then Arya collapsed onto her knees. Ember was there immediately, his head resting against her body, and Ash wrapped herself around them both, offering warmth and protection. Victoria rushed up to where Arya lay and helped her to her feet. The human woman was crying, and Arya realized that she was crying too. They had done it. Against all odds, they had not just defeated the collective but transformed it. They had taken a consciousness that was designed to be evil and had freed it into countless individuals who were now capable of choice and growth and change. Over the following days, Arya and Victoria worked with the newly freed Zynthians to help them understand their newfound individuality. Many were confused and frightened at first, having known nothing but the collective their entire lives. But slowly, with patience and kindness, they began to adjust to their new existence. Some of the Zynthians chose to leave the world, to journey back to the stars and find their own way among the countless worlds of the universe. Others chose to stay, to learn from the humans and elves and dragons, to become part of a new civilization that had been born from the ashes of conflict. Arya stood on a hillside weeks later, watching the first of the Zynthian refugees preparing to depart in restored warships. Ember and Ash stood beside her as always. The great red dragon lowered his head to rest it against her shoulder, and Ash released a sound that was almost like a laugh. "We did it," Arya whispered. "We showed them that there was another way." Victoria joined her on the hillside. "You did more than that," the human woman said. "You showed us all something about the nature of consciousness and connection. You taught us that unity and individuality are not opposites, that we can be free and connected at the same time." Arya looked out at the world that had been transformed by this realization. The hidden cities were now open to all, sharing their knowledge freely. The various human settlements had united into a true federation, not through force but through mutual agreement. Dragons walked openly beside humans, and elves like Arya had emerged from their isolation to join the greater world. "This is just the beginning," Arya said. "There are countless worlds out there, countless civilizations that might be facing the same choice that we faced. And now we have the knowledge and the power to help them choose freedom over conformity.